Good morning everybody and welcome to our Community of Learning webinar for the local delivery pilots this morning. I'm Kate Amity-Katir, I'm the local pilot manager for Greater Manchester from Sport England, and I'm just going to introduce the webinar for you today. So these webinars have been developed to help share the learning from the local delivery pilots across the sector, and through the pilots we want to encourage wider collaborative partnerships which look at how all parts of the community, so a whole system, can better work together to help the most inactive. So today we'll be looking at how the GM pilot, so Greater Manchester, is working with its 10 localities and a variety of different partner organisations to engage with local communities. So we've got a number of colleagues sat round the table from the Greater Manchester pilot who will introduce themselves as we go along. And they're going to be talking about how they're working collaboratively to engage communities, the approaches they're taking, any challenges they've faced and overcome, and the learning that they've gathered. So for those of you that don't know the geography of Greater Manchester, it's comprised of 10 local authority areas, so 10 localities we call them, and it has a population of around 2.8 million people, making it the largest of our pilot areas in the National Local Delivery Pilot Programme. While you're on, for further information about this pilot, we've put the latest pen portrait for Greater Manchester in the resources section of the auditorium in this webinar. So we're really grateful to hear from colleagues from the Greater Manchester pilot today, and we're going to try and talk really honestly to you about what they've seen, what they're hearing throughout their work together. So you're going to hear the lived reality of this work today. There is a lot happening across all the 12 local delivery pilots, so after the webinar I would encourage you to visit the local delivery pilot pages on our website, where you will be able to find out more about what is happening across all 12. So before we move to the presentation, there's just a couple of housekeeping topics that I need to raise with you. So we would welcome questions from those of you that are listening today, and as you're listening, if you have a question that you'd like to ask any of the presenters or myself, please use the Ask a Question tab on the right-hand side of the auditorium. We will answer all those questions at the end of the presentation rather than breaking in between. The webinar will be available on demand in the next couple of days to anybody who's registered for the event, so you will be able to listen again in your own time. And if anybody's got any issues seeing or hearing the webinar, then there's a Test Your Connection button on your auditorium page, which will allow you to see a connection status. If you do have a problem, please let us know through the Ask a Question tab. Okay, so let's get started. So first, I'd like to introduce Richard Davis-Borum, who's the strategy lead for the Greater Manchester local pilots.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everybody. Just to quickly give some strategic context to the local pilot in Greater Manchester. It sits within the GM Moving framework, and GM Moving's been in place, say, 4 years now, and that started having broader system change conversations, and what the local pilot has enabled us to do is have those conversations on a much more local level. And the overall ambition for GM Moving is 75% of people by 2025 to be fairly active or active. And we are working across the 10 localities, and within those 10 localities there's 19 different places. And those 19 different places have basically been chosen via stats, local intelligence from public health, communities, to identify where the investment is going to be maximised. And then within those 19 places, we've got 3 individual cohorts. So our cohorts are 5 to 18-year-olds outside of a school environment, people out of work or in danger of becoming out of work, or those with 40 to 60-year-olds with long-term conditions. And each place, as again, using the data available to them, have decided which one of those cohorts they wish to work with and consult with and engage with in order to make the changes required for them to become more active and to move more. As you can see, we also set up quite early some principles of working. Now, this basically gave us some consistency on the approach that each of the 10 localities would take in the local pilot work, so we're all working and talking the same way. And if you can see at number 3, a key pillar of what we're doing in terms of those principles is that community engagement, and also building on the assets that were within the community. And it's really become the key focus over at least the last 12 months in terms of how we engage, who we engage, and who we utilise to engage with our community groups. So I'm going to move on to Kat now, who leads in our enabling function around community development and engagement.
Thank you, Richard. Morning, everyone. My name is Kat Purcell, and I work for 10GM. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with it, 10GM is a joint venture by local VCFSE sector infrastructure organisations in Greater Manchester. We represent a combined membership of thousands of local voluntary, community, faith and social enterprise organisations working in communities and neighbourhoods across the city region. To give you a flavour of what 10GM looks like, we have Bolton CVS on board, we have Salford CVS on board, we have Manchester Community Action on board, and we have Action Together on board, who cover the 3 localities of Oldham, Rochdale and Tameside. A couple of them are here today, so they'll be able to give you a more granular analysis of what's been happening on the ground in those places. Now, the aim of 10GM is to improve the effectiveness and the impact of the sector in reducing inequality and improving the lives of those who live, work and study in Greater Manchester. As part of the local pilot, we are one of the 4 enablers that are taking a helicopter view of what's happening across the city region. So we have a comms and marketing enabler, there is an evaluation enabler, there is a workforce enabler, and we are looking after the engagement side, which has been a really, really exciting piece of work in terms of respecting and giving localities the freedoms to make the local pilot their own in terms of place, neighbourhoods, communities and cohorts, but equally to try to extrapolate an overarching Greater Manchester narrative of what this looks and feels like across the city region. And the common principles of the investments are paramount across all the great Manchester localities. What the engagement has been looking like on the ground has varied across each locality. And part of my role has been to connect those localities where there are similarities of purpose, similarities of cohorts or communities of identity, direction of travel, and to connect people, whether it is at monthly networking events that GM Moving Local Pilot is running, whether it is more strategically at the fortnightly implementation group meetings that GM Moving Local Pilot are running, and really to act as a critical friend throughout the process, because what we are all in agreement of is that traditional ways of engaging, we are fully aware, are not working. So one locality, for example, created a hashtag no more surveys. So we are all aware that parachuting a consultant in with a clipboard, asking a question with a range of 0 to 10 answers is not going to move anybody. And so the approaches that the localities have taken, some via their CVS counterparts with expressions of interest to have local organisations do the delivery of the engagement side itself. In other areas, we have had people on the ground going to cafes and libraries. We have had people engaging with the residents of a single tower block. We have had people on buses of families going to the seaside as part of a summer hunger programs. The engagement has been very varied. It's been very honest. We are aware that people are consulted out. We are aware that in quite a lot of instances we are targeting people in those deprived areas who have been the guinea pigs of previous projects. And I think part of the honesty and the vulnerability of the approach that we're taking is how it is that we communicate and how it is that we engage, and fundamentally a recognition that we don't go to communities, we are communities ourselves. So that's a broad overview of what it looks like across the region. I'm now going to hand you over to Laura, who is looking after the Oldham locality from Action Together.
Thanks, Kat. So my name's Laura Windsor-Welsh. I work for a local infrastructure charity called Action Together, and my role is that I'm the strategic locality lead for the work that we do in Oldham. So we got involved with the pilot work just as a member part of the kind of local delivery pilot partnership group in Oldham, and or the local pilot partnership group in Oldham. But I think because of my charity, the organisation, one of our strategic aims is about making sure that we're radically amplifying the voices of people in communities. So it felt like a really good opportunity to get kind of more involved with the work and to try and influence and shape the way in which the community engagement approach was going to take through the local pilot, with very, very little resistance from my colleagues across the partnership, which was really welcome. So I guess our approach to community engagement then has been to try and take a strength-based approach around the engagement. And I think that kind of strength-based approach theme is something that we're really consciously trying hard to thread through all the work that we do. So even thinking about some of the areas or the communities of focus through the local pilot work, one of the areas which I'm probably going to talk most about today is Clodic. That is an area where the levels of inactivity are pretty high, so 39%. However, it's the highest kind of community, or it has the highest percentage of people who actually want to become more active. So we want to focus kind of our work on where we have got apparently people who want to become more active. But equally in that place as well, there is a wealth of community capacity. So there are a wealth of established community groups and organisations, predominantly volunteer-led, and we really wanted to work together with those community organisations who have been there for 50, 60 years in that place, and work with them around the engagement approach. So that is what we've done. So rather than, as Kat kind of mentioned, parachuting a consultant in, or members of the wider partnership in Oldham taking a little bit of investment to deliver that work, we directly invested the little bit of investment that was available around engagement directly to a number of community organisations, community groups, and worked with them to design what an engagement framework should look like. And Kat mentioned the sort of hashtag no more surveys, and that came from Oldham, and that came from community members around that community saying we just don't want to fill in any more surveys. So the approach has been based then on community conversations. So, we might have called them focus groups in the past, but a facilitated conversation that is trying to get to the essence of not why are you not being more physically active, but actually what would help you and your friends and your families and your neighbours to become more active? What are the things that could do that? So I guess the approach has been to design that framework together with those community groups and organisations, with an emphasis on having people with relationships in those communities enabling and facilitating those conversations. So I guess there's been a large number of unintended consequences through this work that we did over the summer. I guess the first one is that, in our infinite wisdom, we pulled together the key community anchor organisations that we felt were in that area, and actually through conversations with those groups and organisations, they were identifying other groups, more under the radar groups. They were identifying individuals who were particularly influential. Volunteers in that community were particularly influential to bring them in as part of that kind of wider network of groups and organisations involved in this work. So that was a great outcome. I guess another unintended outcome has been that a number of those groups and organisations working around Clodic have historically been working in a way or in an environment which has meant that they have needed to compete with each other, particularly around things like grant funding, grant investment. So that has given a kind of backdrop of a lack of maybe trust between a couple of the organisations, and actually through working in this way together, there's been a really open and honest conversations around the acknowledgement that that has been the situation in the past, and actually through this work there's an understanding that groups and organisations want to work more collaboratively, want to work more together to eradicate that kind of competitiveness across the voluntary sector, which has been really, really important. Another intended outcome really is, for me, has been a kind of systems change outcome, and a systems change in the way in which we think about community engagement. So like a lot of the localities across Greater Manchester, there's a number of public sector reform type programmes. So there's a place-based working, an integrated place-based working piece. There's the health and social care transformation work, the devolution deal. So there's a lot of things happening, particularly around kind of health and well-being and around communities, that are almost happening around communities rather than happening with communities. And actually what the local pilot work has enabled us to do, as a group of system leaders in Oldham sat around the table, is to take some of the learning from the approaches that we've been delivering through this work and start to think, how do we embed these approaches and what does this mean for things like how we're talking to communities and working with communities around place-based working, around the health and social care transformation. And actually what it's meant is that we can start to have more joined up conversations with communities that enable us and them to work together to understand what all this means for the people in those places. Okay, so I think that's it from me for now, and I'm going to pass on to my colleague Claire.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of the local delivery pilot team. My name's Claire Benson and I work for Salford CVS on the local delivery pilot in Salford. Firstly, I shall give you an insight into the city of Salford. Salford is a city in a metropolitan borough of Greater Manchester, England, extending west from Salford to include the towns of Eccles, Worsley, Swinton, Walkden, Little Hulton and Earlham. The city has a population of 245,600 people. Salford is in the 10% of the most deprived areas in England, and it is ranked as the 22nd most deprived local authority in England out of 326 authorities. Salford has inequities in and across the borough, resulting in differences in health and life expectancy. There are 28,000 females aged 1 to 18 years old who are living in Salford, and more than 6 out of 10 are living in deprived areas. In Salford, 18,000 children are overweight and around 22,000 girls and young women are inactive. This evidence led to the local delivery pilot bid being written with a focus on inactive girls and young women. Salford's local delivery pilot. Salford has a long-standing history of working in partnership, and this pilot utilises that. Salford is a big city, therefore we have a large local delivery pilot team, and all the posts were filled over summer. Our LDP teams include Salford Community Leisure, Youth Alliance, Salford Council, Public Health and Salford CVS. I feel that we are a strong local delivery pilot team who work well together. Our strengths are being proactive. For instance, Youth Alliance have a programme up and running in Little Hulton, which is what the residents wanted. The LDP team are open, honest and share good practice along with useful contacts and important information. Our work embeds the 9 principles of working. I will now explain about the role of Salford CVS in the local pilot work. Who is Salford CVS? Salford CVS Community Voluntary Service is a citywide infrastructure organisation for the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. It is a well-established organisation. We just celebrated its 100th birthday in July. As a membership organisation, we currently have over 900 voluntary community or social enterprise groups as members. Salford CVS is a trusted organisation that has over time developed strong and respected relationships with communities, groups and people. Salford CVS has shown how it can support a good return on investment. An independent evaluation by Claire showed that for every £1 invested, a value of 15 was delivered. Salford CVS has a goal to improve the health and well-being of the residents in the city of Salford. This is done through the Third Sector Grant Fund, which Salford CVS administers on behalf of Salford Clinical Commissioning Group, and this fund is worth approximately £1 million per year. Part of this funding is used to support healthy schools, and as a result there are good links with local primary schools. There are also solid links with groups that focus on health and well-being, all which will benefit my work within the pilot. The grants team at Salford have been wonderful. We are ensuring accessibility to all by using video applications, which has been co-created with a panel of girls and young women. Also, in true co-production style, girls and young women are going on to be on the grant team and investment panel, helping with the decisions. These investments are important to enable activities to happen and to remove barriers. What's good about Salford CVS is that it also delivers wider organisational support, with specialist information and advice, development support and opportunities for influence and collaboration. It's basically a one-stop shop for the sector, which makes it easy for me to support anyone wanting to create a new group or activity through co-production, especially as Salford CVS can provide the support for organisations to establish and develop, which includes training for their staff, volunteers and trustees. So when I'm working with the VCFSE sector, I can confidently offer them support as I know they will receive a high standard of professional knowledge and expertise from my colleagues at Salford CVS. So my approach to community engagement. I started this role at the end of July and I'm relatively still new to the post, but I absolutely love it. I feel that I've made good progress with the engagement building, but this is an ongoing part of the job that I really enjoy. My approach to community engagement has been to use the well-established links offered through Salford CVS and other pilot workers or stakeholders. I've also found LinkedIn to be very useful. I'm also a natural networker, or some may say chatterbox, so given the opportunity, I'll have a conversation with people, anyone and everyone, if I can see a potential link. I've had initial conversations with lots of voluntary community and social enterprise groups. I've been extremely lucky as everyone I've spoken to is keen to get involved in creating physical activity opportunities for girls and young women. I've been very clear about the need for co-production with all the groups I've met. Everyone understands that this co-production approach will hopefully help the girls and young women to feel invested and empowered in the activity. I've had discussions with a few panels of girls and young women who've helped share their knowledge of how they perceive their area and the improvements and opportunities they would like to create for themselves and girls and young women like themselves. They were very keen to be involved and make a difference. In Salford, there's already some amazing initiatives and groups. I'll be working with these VCFSE groups to help facilitate creating an activity that the girls and young women are interested in. It's not about duplicating activities, it's about creating something the girls and young women want to get involved in. In targeted locations, I and the LDP team have been mapping the provisions and opportunities that are available to girls and young women and identifying the gaps. So for instance, in Swinton and Eccles, I will work with the girls and young women and VCFSE sector to create appropriate activities to fill the gaps identified by myself and the girls and the young women. I also feel it's important to learn from existing initiatives to see what works well and then to utilise this learning to help develop activities which are appropriate for the community. As mentioned before, when activities are parachuted into areas, this can lead to lack of trust and engagement from the communities. Therefore, I've ensured that co-production is at the heart of the work that I do with this project. As I know, if people are involved and feel valued, listened to and respected, people are happy to work together for the same goal. I embrace new ideas people suggest, and as I said before, I have met everyone I've met in Salford is very keen to work towards our collective goal of increasing activity in girls and women aged 5 to 18. I'm very lucky to be part of this local delivery pilot. I feel very passionate about the end goal and positive benefits of getting girls and young women and communities active. I'm hopeful we can make a difference to the culture and system within Salford. Thank you. I'll hand you over to Ross.
Good morning. My name is Ross McGuigan. I work for the Leisure Trust in Stockport called Life Leisure. We have a strategic steering group that leads on local delivery pilot work in Stockport, which is made up of ourselves at Life Leisure, the Director of Public Health, the local authority and partners within GM. So my role specifically is working on one of two aspects of the pilot, which is the place-based working in Brinnington. And just to give you a bit of insight into Brinnington, it has a population around 7,200 people, and it's ranked within 2% of the most deprived areas nationally. And a little example, just to put it into a bit more perspective, is that there is a 15-year lower life expectancy compared to most of the affluent areas in Stockport. So you can see there's a lot of different pieces of work to be done to engage with the local community, and that's hopefully why I'm here to work on this across Stockport. So our approach to the community engagement, one of the first things that had been identified was around the fact that, and something that Kat had mentioned previously, was how they've been consulted extensively, and it's one of the things we want to do is what we can take away from this learning. There's been consultation around physical activity, there's been consultation around a physical activity referral service in the area, so we really need to sort of look into how we can utilise this more effectively and really make sure we listen to the local community. One of the approaches around community engagement is the importance of the trusted people to help with sort of getting this insight through conversations. One of the pieces of work I was doing was around some of these social gathering points. These are very sort of few and far between, but we found that if I've been working with a trusted professional in the area, it's been a really good sort of icebreaker to speak to people and have a really kind of informal kind of conversation. And one of the kind of focuses on that is not kind of going in directly and saying, how would you like to get more active? It's been questions more around what do you like about Bridlington, what do you like about your street, what do you like about the area? So it's all been quite, all sort of really positive, and we found that there's been some really good conversations created from that. A lot of the time people do refer to sort of the negativities, but essentially if you are talking about the negativities quite a lot, you find that you don't really sort of make much progress with that. So talking about positives has been really important. As part of those conversations, it's been really important to kind of look at just beginning that kind of trust and relationship building with people, because they are real kind of assets to the community and to their friends, families, neighbours. So really want to make sure that we can just kind of speak to them and be part of that community and make sure that they feel like they haven't worked with someone who's just coming in to work for a few weeks, a few months or something like that. They want to see a bit of longevity with it, so building that trust and relationships is really important. As part of that work as well, I've been building on a number of different partners that work in the area. Part of my work was around just asset mapping, and it really shows the extent of how many different partners and people work within that local community. So linked in with that is kind of finding the people who work frontline, who work a bit more strategic, and kind of bridging that gap between all those different sort of workers across the sort of local community. So I was really focusing on trying to build and create a lot more enthusiasm around this type of work. And just in relation to the community engagement I said about social gathering points, I found that, just to kind of put into context, I found that if you went door knocking, it's not kind of the way to engage with sort of local people. Two people in particular who I feel that if I didn't meet them at the social gathering point, connected with them there, started speaking to them a lot more, I actually went and met them in their house on the street. I feel like if I'd gone door knocking on that street, I wouldn't have had that direct engagement with them, because a lot of time they probably feel like you are trying to sell something. So I found that approach has been much more effective, and hoping to really kind of expand on that in the future. So just some little lessons that we learned to date. There is a limited resilience around test and learn with past experiences of sort of programs and projects. There's been that kind of feeling of dejection and feeling that so many services have been stripped back from the local community. So when programs and projects have come, quite a lot of them haven't been in a sort of sustainable model. So we found that a lot of people talk about this and talk about how they used to be this and used to be that. So we have to sort of completely respect there is that limited resilience around that. We are really kind of focusing on making sure solutions are led by local residents, making sure that we kind of understand what their motivators are, understanding what they want, and it's not just completely directly linked to activity initially, but we feel like we can bring in some of the physical activity aspects of it at maybe a slightly later date. Like we said, the engagement is really key with this. We created an informal sort of forum setting with partners and some residents, and this was really to kind of gain insight on the common themes around activity, because again, we need to sort of start looking at what things we can do locally that will really kind of embrace their kind of community spirit and things like that, and try and see what those common themes are towards creating that kind of that social movement, as well as a culture change around physical activity within the local community. Final couple of points really is around the lack of places to use for the promotion of. We've got the That Counts campaign in Greater Manchester, and there is a lack of sort of promotional points within the community. So we are kind of considering as much as possible, how do we extend its reach across all areas of the community. There is a central point within Brinnington, but we can't say that it's accessed by everyone who live across sort of Brinnington. That includes there's 7 tower blocks just in a local area, so there's quite dense populations in kind of pockets of the community. And kind of linked to that lack of promotion, one of the things we've identified is that utilising the social skills of residents for the trusted communication by family members, friends, neighbours, and kind of other people that are around, because their social skills are key to this, and people will listen to those kind of cohorts, family, friends, neighbours. So it's important that we create a social movement with this as well, and embrace kind of the outcomes that we want to achieve with it. So that's everything for me, and I'm just going to pass you on to Kim Lyle from Manchester.
Great, thank you, Ross. Morning, everybody. Hello, my name's Kim Lyle, and I'm the local pilot project officer for Manchester. I work for an organisation called Manchester Active that is responsible for driving sport and physical activity across Manchester, with an aim of inspiring and encouraging people to lead more active and healthy lifestyles. Manchester's local pilot approach is place-based, covering 4 geographic areas across the locality. Those areas include Ancoats and Beswick, Clayton and Openshaw, Miles Platting and Newton Heath, which is the traditional East Manchester, and also Woodhouse Park in Withenshaw. We have focused on all 4 key audiences within these areas, which include children and young people in out-of-school settings, people out of work or at risk of becoming workless, people aged 40 to 60 with a long-term health condition, and also people with a learning disability. So as you can see, our project scope is very broad and wide. The majority of my role involves leading on the operations side of the pilot, whilst also being out in the field engaging with our communities and audiences of focus. At Manchester Active, we have a number of programmes which we're also committed to working in a place-based community development style way, some of which include our Winning Hearts and Minds and active ageing programmes. And so the local pilot agenda is heavily supported by the wider team and organisation. In terms of our engagement approach, engagement is absolutely fundamental to our approach, and this is largely based on the learnings from our other programmes, in that strong engagement with communities is more likely to promote sustainable and longer-lasting outcomes. It was also based on the recognition that we needed to do something different and work in a different way, going deep into the heart of the communities we're working, gaining rich, insightful and meaningful data. Now, in terms of some challenges that we faced along the way, whilst positive progress has been made, we found the engagement progress has been significantly slower than we envisaged. This is mainly due to the time it takes to connect with our communities of interest and then undertake the conversations that we're having. We've also found the ability to react and capitalise on engagement opportunities as they arise, a challenge due to capacity. Following learning from our Winning Hearts and Minds approach, we're not simply obtaining questionnaire type responses from the people we engage with. Instead, we are having rich, in-depth conversations to elicit the rich data we require, and this can often mean that conversations with just one person can last up to an hour or even longer. This doesn't get in the way of progress, it just means that progress is slower than we thought it might be originally. It all feels very different to what we normally do. Past engagement has been very much about getting a volume of responses rather than being concerned with the quality of responses. Over the last few months, in addition to the engagement work that I've been doing, we've tried a couple of other engagement approaches. One of these, an example of this includes we provided training for residents to engage with their peers in the hope that we'll be able to use this small army to expand our reach into communities. The reality was that these volunteers needed much more support, management and direction than we were able to give, or that we had envisaged would be needed, and so they have not been able to operate as independently as we would like, which has limited their capacity to undertake engagement for us. Another approach we took was we also commissioned a voluntary sector organisation as a try and test to undertake engagement for us across a number of their programmes. Our learnings from this was that this model wasn't quite right for our approach, as we didn't seem to be gaining the rich, insightful data that we require. We're currently in the process of exploring a few new ideas to progress the engagement piece further, to be continued. So what has changed in learnings? As a result of the engagement work completed today, our knowledge and awareness of the real issues that communities face in their day-to-day lives has increased, and it's also made us appreciate more why physical activity may be further away than, from their consciousness than we first thought. An example of one of the many themes that are starting to emerge through many of the conversations we've been having is one of which, in particularly in social housing environments, whereby we found that intergenerational disagreements about how communal outdoor space can and should be used, thereby limiting opportunities for different age groups to be physically active outdoors. So we're keen to explore this aspect in more detail. Another theme that's starting to emerge is the gap in the system once a person completes a physical activity on referral course. Once they complete the course, they're expected to stay active and exercise independently. However, the majority of people do not have the confidence to do so. So to address this, we're already looking at training up workforce in gyms across Manchester to cater for this audience. However, we feel that this is just a starting point and that there are more opportunities around this topic to be explored further. In addition, we've also found that there are many agencies who don't normally operate in the physical activity sphere who are really keen to be involved in the journey. For example, housing associations and the Canal and River Trust. However, there is a danger that we act alongside these agencies in that we do to our communities rather than having the patience to continue to wait for the bottom-up community development style opportunities to emerge. So that's Manchester in a nutshell. Pass over to Kate.
Okay, thanks, Kim. So thanks to all the presenters for their presentations, and we really hope everybody's found that a bit of an interesting insight into what's happening across Greater Manchester. So we've got about 20 minutes now for some questions, and we've had some really, really good ones in already, so thank you for those who have submitted questions. If anybody else has any questions they want to send in, please feel free to do that. We probably won't have time to answer them all, but we'll try to get through as many of those as possible. So the first one I just want to pick up is about consultation fatigue, as the questioner has named it. So just aiming this firstly at Laura and then Kat. Do you guys think discussion of legacy is important to people and communities? So if I can pick that up with Laura first, please.
Sure, yeah. I think the question of legacy is absolutely critical. I know that through the community conversations that we had in Glodick, one of the key, there was kind of 8 key themes that came out of those conversations, and over again, one of the key themes was around legacy, around sustainability. So a feeling from the community. So Glodick is quite a deprived community and suffers multiple disadvantages, predominantly South East Asian population. And over the last, well, certainly 20 years that I've been working across communities in Oldham, there's been a number of initiatives, programmes, investments that have come through. But that time-limited kind of way in which we've funded work and programmes has meant that, you know, there's great uptake on stuff when a programme's there and happening, but actually as soon as that initiative is over, or that funding has run out, or the administration change, or a priority shift, or whatever, what those big projects and what that investment has not managed to do in the past has been to create the legacy that is around investing in the place and investing in the people. That means that they're not relying on an initiative or that programme to help people to stay active. So actually what we're hearing from community members is that what is really important to them is that we do invest better in facilities and in the outdoor space within that community, and that we actually invest in people, in their capacity, their skills, and their confidence to just go and do stuff, to just go and help each other do stuff.
Okay, Kat, do you want to pick up on that one too?
Yes, I jotted down a few notes and I'm now realising I've pretty much got what Laura was saying. I think just to really to confirm, I think the importance of legacy is absolutely paramount, and I think it's paramount at granular level to the point where Ross talked before about having a social movement. Laura's been talking about the community actually owning what's happening on the ground. So, and that's important not just in kind of what we do, but in how we talk about it. So at implementation group level, we have created a safe space of honesty where we allow ourselves to challenge ourselves when we fall back into old ways of working, and we talk about interventions, and we talk about programs of delivery. All of them come with deadlines and timescales. So I think that how the language is key to legacy as well. So not so much just what we do, but how we talk about it. It is equally important at system change level, because the last thing we want to see, say for example across Greater Manchester and across the devolution programme, is for us to have to refresh strategies 5 years down the line to talk about legacy. That should sort of speak for itself. And in that sense, it should be as much bottom-up as top-owned, and permissions then should be in place to allow us to speak that different language, and in a way that it is meaningful and goes beyond the tick boxes of co-design, co-production, asset-based. These words have got to mean something, and the community has got to own them.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you, Laura. So we've got another question come in that I'm just going to aim at Richard. So Richard, can you just talk us through how we're capturing the impact around this work, and really sort of mapping and understanding and, I guess, recording everything that's coming out of this community engagement type process?
Yeah, I think this has probably been and continues to be our biggest challenge. We are working with, so one of our enablers is evaluation, and we're working with Substance in Sheffield Hallam to capture, to put in place a framework to capture the impact that's happening within the 10 localities, and by proxy all the information that's going on in their own communities and neighbourhoods. I think where we're dealing with and dealing in different systems, there's a tradition around quantitative. And we're not doing that. There is no quantitative measure attached to the local pilot work, which makes it even slightly more challenging. So we're really looking at that qualitative impact, and probably the softer side of that. So what I mean by that is the language that's being used in meetings, the meetings that the local leads are being invited to, the people who are wanting to have conversations about the local pilot work. And now, at the moment, most of that is being captured within people's brains, and we're only beginning to download that into a platform where we're hoping we can capture a lot of the information going forwards. Consistently, we have network meetings which take place on a monthly basis, and essentially that's a place where a lot of the information is downloaded and caught by the evaluators. We also have researchers embedded within the localities, so they're actually part of the locality teams. They're in the meetings, they're in the community, they're listening to the conversations, they're hearing the differences that are being made, and they're replaying that back in real time to the steering groups and to the influencers, and they're beginning to understand a little bit more about what's happening in their place. In terms of the celebration, again, the network meetings are probably the place where, on a monthly basis, we celebrate all the good work that's happening. And every 6 months, we bring together a peer review session. So the locality presents what's been going on in their place, the challenges, the good things, where they're influencing in the system, or where they'd like some improvements, or where they'd like a bit more support moving forwards. And we do that in a very safe environment, but with some challenge built in as well. We had our last one 2 weeks ago, and that all then feeds into the process evaluation which Sport England have every 6 months as well.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So another question that I'm going to aim at Richard is just about, we've had a couple of questions really about how we're using learning from other programmes and also engaging with national partners who might be doing some engagement work with some of our cohorts. Can I ask you that question please, Richard?
Yeah, again with the national partners, I suppose we wanted to get our house in order in some ways and make sure that we are understanding what's going in our localities before we fully engage with the national partners. And we feel we're in that place now. It's taken us probably 9 months to get into that position, and we're now bringing the national partners together, so they're all normally in one place where we can have those conversations and they can connect in with the localities and begin to understand in more detail what the locality requirements are. And from that point onwards, we sort of, a central team, step back and allow the conversations to flow amongst the partners and the localities and allow them to have the conversation. We aren't the gatekeepers to the information. We don't want to be seen as the ones pulling together this work. And it's really down to that conversation about where that particular area of work will develop. I suppose again it's trying to embed the way in which Manchester and Greater Manchester is working in terms of the principles, in terms of our approach, and ensuring that approach is married by the approach taken by the national partners who perhaps aren't used to working in a more qualitative environment. Where we can, we have worked with our colleagues with GM Active who are doing some work at the moment around prehab for cancer, and we're taking a lot of the learning from that and applying that across our long-term conditions work as well. And obviously the Untouchables campaign is only just launched as well, so we're beginning to pick up some of the work from that going forwards.
I think as well, if I can just add to that one, so we're very much trying to use learning from other existing programmes and share it across Greater Manchester. And what we do have is obviously the selection of people who've spoken around the table here is quite small, but there are all sorts of people involved in this pilot work who've worked in the sector for quite a long time and are well connected into different partners and programmes and projects that have happened previously. So we do try to draw on that as we are going forward and as we're progressing and building relationships. But ultimately, we are trying to start our approach by speaking to the community, which means not having any, assumptions about what they might want to say to us. So it is a little bit of a fine balance between using existing learning, but also having conversations in the current present climate and context that somebody is living in that community. Okay, one final question, and I'm just going to pose it to the whole panel, and those who want to answer it are going to show me their hands and answer. So just one very sort of overarching question to finish. So how do you all feel that this work is different to the way we've traditionally operated in the sport and physical activity sector? Okay, Claire wants to start.
Okay, I'm new to this sector, but I just think it's a fabulous way of working. I think it's very brave that Sport England's doing this, but I think it's going to have really good impact, especially the co-production and letting people in the real communities impact what's happening in their communities. I think it's good.
Thank you, Claire. Kat?
We've had months of talking philosophically about blank pieces of paper type conversations, and that's the level of difference that this generally feels like. I've never worked on anything before that has come with the freedoms that are attached to this in terms of no specific outcomes, no specific KPIs, no bombs on seats, no figures, and I think we've all acknowledged that it is incredibly refreshing and incredibly scary at the same time. And what I really like about this is that we have been given the freedom and the time that it takes to actually do something different. And like I said, I've never been involved in anything like this before.
Thank you, Kat.
I think one thing that strikes me in terms of this way of working is that there's quite a lot of uncertainty. So, you know, historically you'd have put a community engagement plan together, you'd have a Gantt chart, it'd all be charted out, you'd give yourself a specific amount of time to do it. And I think the really refreshing thing, kind of harking back to what Kat was saying there, is that there isn't necessarily the pressures around a piece of work has to be completed by a certain point in time to get other things going. So having more time to develop relationships, to trust, to have those real in-depth conversations has been really useful. But I think the other flip side of that is actually that what we found in Glodic is actually being community-led and community-driven. If you start having conversations with people, you start to raise expectations. So there's an additional pressure about, well, it's not necessarily about what your timeline is, it's about what the community's timeline is now. And if you're starting to, Ross, you were talking about creating a social movement, if you're starting to get some energy around a social movement, that is the time that you need to kind of pound. So the uncertainty of things could take quite a long time, or actually we need to move really quickly now on this because we've got some energy and we've got some commitment, we've got some people who want to do some stuff, let's get going. That kind of managing that balance has been really interesting.
Thank you, Laura. Ross, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, it's really great to be part of work that's a lot more sort of transformational as opposed to transactional, like we said, in terms of sort of the outcomes from it. Just touching on what Laura had said as well, it is making sure you grow in that social movement from people, but making sure they have that ownership of what is taking place as well. They felt very much like they have been completely disengaged from the decision makers, so we really need to kind of bridge that gap. And like what's mentioned, having those kind of in-depth conversations, you actually think a lot more about what they said, and when they start talking about community spirit, you start to have a much better understanding of what that is, because sometimes that might get thrown about quite a lot when you talk about community engagement work. But the kind of community spirit, when they talk about the types of things that happens in their local community and what they would like to do, and how you can help guide them to different activities as well, has been really kind of eye-opening.
Thank you, Ross. And Richard, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess we recently had Stephen Pleasant, who's the Chief Exec of Tameside Council and a Council Officer for the CCG in Tameside and Glossop. And his view of the work was, you're all working on the right side of history. And I think that's quite profound in some ways, because we are beginning to especially in Greater Manchester, think about what does the community want, as opposed to what do we think the community wants. And this approach and this investment has allowed us the time, the capability to create the connections, not just with the community, but with the wider voluntary sector as well, which I don't think we've probably done as much of previously, and utilise the broader skills that are in a place, as opposed to just think that we have the knowledge or we have the skills to do the work that's required to get this off the ground. It has come with its own challenges. The challenge is trying to get people to understand that we're not target focused, that we're not just focused on the output, but we're actually looking at the journey and how we get to the journey and understanding that. Because if we understand what's working and what's not working, we can make sure we don't make the same mistakes again and again and again as perhaps we have previously. I think it's been very brave of Sport England to allow us to work in this way and give us the flexibility to utilise the knowledge that we have and really work with the communities. I suppose it's working with them and not doing to them, but doing with them. I think that's been the significant change that we've seen over the last 12 months.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to wrap up now. Thanks everybody for listening, who's down the line, and obviously again thank you to our speakers. This webinar will be available on demand in the next couple of days if anybody wants to listen again. And as I said at the beginning, you can keep in touch with what's happening across all of the local delivery pilots via our website on the local delivery pilots pages of the Our Work drop-down tab. And we'll also be in touch with anybody who's opted in to receive more information about future webinars and other news. So finally, thanks once again to everybody for listening and to our presenters, and enjoy the rest of your day.